Chapter 1. The Legend of the Ghost Ship. The vast expanse of space held its secrets like a grave, many of them buried beneath layers of myth and time, forgotten in the wake of endless wars and the rise and fall of empires. Few legends, however, captured the imagination of the galaxy's inhabitants quite like the story of the Vanguard. It was a name that carried a weight all its own, a name passed down through generations, a ghostly whisper in the corridors of power. To those who knew the truth or perhaps had merely heard the hushed rumors, the Vanguard was no ordinary ship. It was a symbol of a lost era, a weapon of such unimaginable power that even the greatest minds of the galaxy could only speculate on its true capabilities. The Vanguard was a myth, of course, or so everyone believed. The truth had been obscured over the years, buried beneath layers of propaganda, lost records, and the passing of countless centuries. Yet, for some, the myth lived on, its ghost haunting their thoughts and fueling their thirst for discovery. The story began long before the fall of the Terran Dominion, when humanity had stretched its reach across the stars, forging alliances and battling for control of new worlds. The Vanguard was built during a time of fierce conflict, a time when the Terran Dominion stood at the peak of its power. The ship was more than just a weapon, it was an embodiment of human ingenuity and ambition. It was designed to be the ultimate deterrent, a vessel that could turn the tide of any battle with a single strike. The Vanguard's size alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of its enemies. It was said to be as long as a moon and nearly as wide, bristling with weaponry that had never been seen before. Its hull was reinforced with alloys stronger than anything the galaxy had ever known, making it virtually indestructible to conventional weaponry. The Vanguard was not just a ship. It was a fortress that roamed the stars, a symbol of the Terran Dominion's supremacy in the galaxy. But it wasn't just the Vanguard's size or its weapons that made it a legend. It was the rumors that surrounded its final mission, the mission that led to its disappearance. According to those who knew the most about the ship, those who had served on it or worked alongside its engineers, the Vanguard was supposed to be humanity's greatest triumph. But the war it was sent to fight would become its undoing. The Dominion was locked in a bloody conflict with the Tsar, a race of hyper-intelligent, war-hardened aliens who had managed to push back humanity's forces to the brink of collapse. The Dominion had no choice but to deploy its ultimate weapon, the Vanguard, to break the deadlock. Its mission was simple: destroy the Tsar fleet and ensure that humanity's hold on its colonies remained unchallenged. But as the Vanguard entered the Tsar system, something went horribly wrong. The ship and its crew were never heard from again. In the years that followed, the Vanguard became the stuff of legends. Some said it had been destroyed in a cataclysmic battle, its wreckage scattered across the stars. Others claimed that it had been lost in a rift in space-time, its crew trapped in a dimension where time flowed differently. A few believed that the ship had simply vanished, slipping through the cracks of reality itself, awaiting the right moment to return. But as the years turned into decades and the decades into centuries, the story of the Vanguard faded into obscurity. It became a tale told around campfires, in the halls of old academies, and in the stories of the old war veterans who swore they had seen the mighty ship in action before its disappearance. Yet, for all the stories, no one had ever found any trace of the Vanguard. It was as if it had never existed at all. By the time the next Galactic War began this time, between the once great Terran Empire and a new coalition of alien races, the Vanguard was little more than a footnote in history. The Terran forces, now diminished and fractured, had no choice but to fight for survival against the rising tide of alien invaders. The once legendary Vanguard was now a myth, and the human race had nothing left to rely on but its own dwindling military might. The Empire crumbled under the pressure of war, and with it, the hope of discovering the Vanguard or any of its secrets. But amidst the chaos, there were those who believed that the Vanguard still existed, waiting, hidden away in the darkness of space. They were the dreamers, the adventurers, and the conspirators, those who had never let go of the hope that the Vanguard would one day return. One such believer was Captain Callum Voss, a seasoned officer who had seen the horrors of galactic warfare firsthand. He had heard the stories of the Vanguard since his youth, and like many others, he had dismissed them as nothing more than fairy tales. However, as the war against the alien coalition reached its most desperate hour, a strange occurrence began to stir the old tales back to life. It all started with a message, an encrypted transmission intercepted by the Terran fleet's most advanced listening station. The message was brief and cryptic, with only a single line of text. The Vanguard has returned. It was enough to send shockwaves through the fleet. At first, no one believed it. The Vanguard was a myth, after all, a relic of a past era, lost to the winds of time. Yet, as the days passed, more strange transmissions began to appear, each one more detailed than the last. The messages spoke of a ship appearing on the outskirts of the galactic battlefield, a massive silhouette emerging from the depths of a nebula, its dark form visible only as a faint outline against the glowing backdrop of distant stars. It was always the same ship, the Vanguard, and it was drawing closer to the front lines. The transmission's origins were unknown, and the voices on the other end were static-filled and barely intelligible. But there was no mistaking the coordinates. They were headed directly for the heart of the war. Captain Voss, now stationed aboard the Terran flagship, Dreadnought Ascendant, was among the first to receive the report. He had spent years commanding fleets in battle, and he knew the risks of false hope better than anyone. But something about the transmission struck him deeply. There was a sense of urgency, of truth in the garbled words that seemed to cut through the noise of the war. The Vanguard was real. It had to be. For weeks, the fleet moved in silence, unsure of how to respond. The Terran forces were stretched thin, their resources depleted, and their morale shattered by constant defeat. The return of the Vanguard could be humanity's salvation or its doom. As the fleet neared the coordinates, something incredible happened. The first sighting came in the form of a massive energy pulse so strong that it sent shockwaves through the surrounding space. The Vanguard had appeared. No one was prepared for what they saw next. Emerging from the nebula like a titan rising from the depths, the Vanguard came into view. It was far more majestic and terrifying than any of the legends had described. The ship's immense hull gleamed like polished obsidian, its surface crisscrossed with ancient markings that had not been seen by any living soul for centuries. The ship's weapons were locked and ready, massive turrets pointed toward the enemy lines. Its engines burned with a cold, blue fire, casting an eerie glow across the battlefield. The size of the Vanguard was staggering, was easily the length of a small moon, its width stretching far beyond the standard fleet ships. Its silhouette alone sent a wave of panic through the alien forces who had previously believed themselves unstoppable. For the first time in decades, the enemies of humanity were faced with a force they could not comprehend, a living nightmare from the past. As the Vanguard moved into position, its weapons came online. The first salvo was a stunning display of power, an immense blast of energy that tore through the enemy's front lines, decimating entire ships with ease. The soundless shockwaves rippled through space, shaking the very fabric of the galaxy's star systems. The warship's attack was relentless, its ancient weaponry firing with precision and deadly accuracy. Alien fleets scattered in fear, unable to comprehend the ferocity of the assault. But even as the Vanguard unleashed its fury, there were those who still questioned its origins. Was this the true Vanguard? Or was it something else, something even more dangerous? Only time would tell. Captain Voss, standing on the bridge of the Ascendant, watched in awe as the battle unfolded before him. The impossible had happened, the Vanguard had returned, but he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this was only the beginning of a greater mystery that stretched far beyond the war itself. The Vanguard was no mere ship, it was a living piece of history, a relic with the power to change the fate of the galaxy. And Captain Voss knew that he would be at the center of it all. The sight of the Vanguard was like a waking nightmare. The legends hadn't done it justice. No one had imagined the ship's true scale, its unyielding presence as it tore through the sky, its dark and gleaming surface illuminated only by the dying stars around it. Captain Voss felt a cold shiver run through him, not just from the ship's immense power, but from the overwhelming sense that something ancient and forgotten was waking up, something far more significant than any mere weapon. The Vanguard was alive, in some strange, metaphorical sense, as if it had been slumbering for centuries only to awaken with a vengeance. And now, that vengeance was being unleashed upon the enemies of humanity, just as it had been meant to all those years ago. In the midst of the battle, the enemy fleets, the Tsar, the ones who had first locked horns with the Dominion, were thrown into disarray. The Vanguard's first salvo had been enough to obliterate entire Tsar battlecruisers, their hulking forms splintering into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The immense quantum disruptor cannons, long thought to be just another piece of Dominion propaganda, roared to life, tearing through the vacuum of space with terrifying accuracy. The Vanguard was unstoppable, a myth made flesh, its destructive power unmatched by anything the enemy had. The Tsar, once the most fearsome and technologically advanced race the Dominion had ever fought, were scrambling for survival, their once proud fleets scattering in terror. Captain Voss stood frozen for a moment, watching the devastation unfold before him. His mind raced, torn between awe and fear. The Vanguard was no ordinary warship. It was a symbol, a weapon of such unparalleled destruction that the mere mention of its name had once sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. And now, it was here on the battlefield, fighting on the side of humanity once again. He had never believed in the stories. The Vanguard had been a myth, an old war tale, passed down by veterans of a time long gone. But the reality standing before him shattered everything he had ever known about war. The Vanguard was real, and it had returned not just to battle but to dominate. As the Terran fleet, emboldened by the appearance of the ship, launched its own attacks, the tide of the war seemed to turn. The Tsar, who had once pushed the Dominion to the brink of annihilation, were now on the defensive, their advanced fleets no match for the Vanguard's technological supremacy. But Captain Voss, even as he gave orders and watched the battle unfold, couldn't help but wonder about the ship's true nature. The Vanguard had never been just a tool of war. It had been a symbol of the Terran Dominion's might and ambition. But now, as it seemed to wreak havoc across the battlefield, Captain Voss had to ask himself, was this ship simply a weapon? Or was it something else entirely? Something with a purpose far beyond what anyone could comprehend? The questions gnawed at him. Who had revived the Vanguard? Who had brought it back from the depths of myth and obscurity? Was it a secret faction within the Terran Confederation that had somehow reactivated the ship? Or had the Vanguard somehow awoken on its own, driven by a purpose no one could fathom? These were questions without answers, and for now, Captain Voss could only focus on the task at hand: surviving the battle. The Vanguard had already proven its worth, but the battle was far from over. And as powerful as the Vanguard was, there was always the threat of retaliation, of enemies turning the tide once more. With the Vanguard now in the thick of the battle, Captain Voss found himself leading his fleet into the heart of the chaos. Every command he issued was backed by the knowledge that the Terran forces now had the upper hand, but it wasn't a certainty. The enemy was regrouping, adapting, and soon, the Vanguard could become the hunted. The Tsar were not a race to be easily defeated. Their cunning and their technological prowess were unmatched. Even with the Vanguard's overwhelming firepower, Captain Voss knew the battle was far from decided. The true test would come when the Vanguard and the Tsar's finest forces clashed head-on. And then, as if to prove his fears right, a new signal appeared on the fleet's scanners. It wasn't a standard distress beacon. It was something different, something more insidious. The Vanguard was not the only powerful ship in the galaxy. The Tsar had their own secrets. There was a new enemy on the horizon. Chapter 2. The Silent Ghost. The battle raged on for hours, but even as the Vanguard and the Terran fleet dominated the battlefield, the enemy forces began to regroup, showing a resilience that only fueled Captain Voss's concerns. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the Vanguard, there was something unnerving about the way the Tsar were responding. They had suffered heavy losses, but instead of retreating, they seemed to be fortifying their position. It was as if they were waiting for something, a trump card, perhaps something even more dangerous than the Vanguard. The Tsar were not a race known for their overwhelming strength in numbers, but rather for their exceptional cunning and advanced technology. It was their ability to adapt and evolve in the face of adversity that had made them such formidable opponents. Captain Voss had faced them many times during his tenure as a fleet commander, but he had never seen them respond to defeat with such poise. They weren't broken. They were preparing. As the Vanguard continued its barrage against the enemy ships, Captain Voss couldn't shake the feeling that something else was about to unfold. His instincts told him to be ready. And then, the fleet received an unexpected transmission, an encrypted message that cracked through the static of the battle's chaos. It was a signal from a source none of them recognized, and its content was chilling. The message was short, but it echoed through the ship's communication channels like a warning. The words, distorted but clear, sent a ripple of shock through the crew. "We are coming for the Vanguard." There was no time to process the message before the first signs of the new threat became apparent. A massive energy distortion erupted at the far edge of the system, the space around it warping as though the very fabric of reality had been stretched to its limits. And then, out of the distortion, a new ship emerged, an enormous, sleek vessel that dwarfed anything Captain Voss had ever seen. It was black, its surface reflecting nothing but the emptiness of space, as if it absorbed all light, all heat. It was an engineering marvel, an impossible ship. The new arrival sent shockwaves through the fleet as its weapon systems powered up, its massive cannons aimed directly at the Vanguard. This wasn't a standard enemy vessel. It was something far more dangerous, a weapon of unimaginable power, one that had been hidden from the galaxy for centuries. The Tsar had not been defeated. This was their final play. And now, the Vanguard was facing its first real challenge since its return. The Vanguard had once been the most fearsome weapon in the galaxy, but it was no longer the only one. Captain Voss's grip tightened on the command chair as he watched the massive new ship power up its weapons. The Vanguard had to be ready. But more importantly, so did the entire fleet. The myth of the Vanguard was real, but now it would face its reckoning. The moment the new vessel emerged from the energy distortion, everything changed. The very presence of the ship altered the entire battlefield's dynamics. Captain Voss had seen some of the most dangerous ships in the galaxy, but nothing prepared him for what he was witnessing now. This ship, this unknown behemoth, was not like anything the Tsar had ever fielded. It wasn't merely a weapon of war. It was something entirely alien, as though the ship had been built with a purpose so specific, it couldn't be understood by conventional military minds. There was an eerie calm about it, an absence of anything typical to warships. No unnecessary markings, no ornamentation, just a sleek, dark silhouette that exuded an aura of pure destruction. The Tsar fleet, momentarily stunned by the arrival of the Vanguard, now found themselves with a new ally, a terrifying and potent new force that could potentially eclipse humanity's greatest weapon. As the enemy fleet quickly adjusted their strategies, Captain Voss knew that the balance of power had shifted once again. But it wasn't just the Tsar who were about to feel the pressure. He knew that the Terran fleet, along with the Vanguard, would need to adapt quickly to stand any chance of survival. With the sudden appearance of this new threat, the battle around them became a three-way conflict. The Vanguard, though a myth come to life, was now facing a mysterious ship that was equally as powerful, if not more so. The Terran forces, meanwhile, were caught in the middle of an unstoppable war machine and a battle-hardened enemy. Voss's mind raced as he quickly analyzed the situation. The Vanguard was already engaging the new enemy ship, firing its massive disruptor beams in rapid succession, creating explosions that illuminated the dark void of space. But the alien ship did not flinch. Instead, it absorbed the blasts, its surface shimmering as though the very laws of physics were bending around it. The Vanguard's firepower, once enough to reduce fleets to atoms, was now simply evaporating upon contact with this unknown vessel's shields, leaving the enemy unscathed. The Vanguard continued to press the attack, its quantum cannons roaring with each release, but it was as if it were fighting an invincible opponent. "Captain, the new ship has activated a singularity field," reported Lieutenant Tessa Harlow, Voss's tactical officer, her voice tight with urgency. "It's using gravity wells to deflect our shots and disrupt our targeting systems." Voss cursed under his breath. The singularity field was a known tactic, but the scale of it was unprecedented. It essentially created small, localized black holes that distorted the trajectory of incoming fire, rendering traditional weapon systems nearly useless. The new alien vessel had adapted so quickly that it was already countering the Vanguard's greatest strength. "We can't win a war of attrition," Voss muttered to himself, his eyes glued to the hollow display. "We need to get in close. We need to disable that field generator before this turns into a massacre." His mind quickly shifted from tactics to strategy. The Terran fleet, already on the defensive, had to act fast before the Tsar, emboldened by this new ally, launched a counteroffensive that could overwhelm them. The Vanguard, despite its immense firepower, was vulnerable to the enemy ship's technology. There was a brief moment of hesitation, but Voss knew that his fleet had one advantage the alien forces did not have. They had the Vanguard, and with it, the surprise factor. No one had ever truly understood the ship's capabilities beyond its initial myth. But now, as it stood on the battlefield, It was time to unlock its true potential. Divert all power to our forward shields, Voss barked. Deploy fighter squadrons to create a distraction. The Vanguard needs to keep drawing their fire. Understood, Captain, Harlow said, her fingers flying across the console as she executed his orders. As the Terran fleet scrambled to engage the alien ship, Voss turned his attention to the Vanguard. He needed to understand more about what made this ship so powerful. It wasn't just advanced weapons. There had to be something else at play, something hidden deep within its systems. And he was going to find it, whether he had to risk his life in the process or not. Voss to engineering. Open a direct line to the Vanguard, he ordered. We need to tap into their systems, see what we're working with. Moments later, the ship's comms chirped, and Voss's voice echoed across the void, carried by the communication channels. This is Captain Voss of the Dreadnought Ascendant. We need full access to your systems now. Our very survival depends on it. There was a long pause, but then a voice came through, distorted, robotic, and yet oddly familiar. Access granted, Captain. We have been waiting. The words sent a chill down Voss's spine. Who or what was he speaking to? This wasn't just an ordinary AI. It was something more. But there was no time to ponder the question. With the link established, the Terran fleet's engineering teams began the arduous task of interfacing with the Vanguard's ancient systems. A series of data streams flowed into Voss's terminal, the ship's weapon systems, shield protocols, and stealth capabilities all revealing themselves in a flood of incomprehensible data. Amid the sea of information, one particular line stood out: initiating countermeasures, releasing quantum phasing drive. Voss's heart raced. The Vanguard had the ability to phase in and out of real space, something that, if utilized correctly, could shift the tide of the battle entirely. The Vanguard was more than just a ship, it was a weapon. A living entity that adapted to its surroundings, like a hunter tracking its prey. And it was about to unleash a power so great, it would make the enemy rethink their entire strategy. Everyone, brace for impact, Voss ordered, gritting his teeth as the ship's systems hummed with power. Chapter 3. The Battle of Shadows. The universe seemed to hold its breath as the Vanguard's quantum phasing drive powered up. The black, alien ship that had once seemed impervious to all conventional attacks now found itself facing a weapon that not only countered its defenses but could also displace the very space it occupied. Captain Voss had gambled everything on this moment. The Vanguard was the key to turning the battle, and as the ship's systems hummed with power, he had one singular hope, that they could gain the upper hand. The enemy ship had continued to fire relentlessly at the Vanguard, but each strike seemed to vanish into the fabric of space itself. The Terran fleet, using the Vanguard as a beacon, closed in from all sides, their ships forming a tight formation around the colossal warship. And then, without warning, the Vanguard phased out of existence. For a brief, terrifying moment, there was nothing but emptiness. The entire battlefield seemed to freeze in place, as though time itself had come to a halt. The Vanguard had slipped into another dimension, leaving the enemy ship momentarily stunned, unable to track its position. The Terran fleet followed suit, their ships utilizing the same phasing technology to briefly vanish into nothingness. It was a gamble, a dangerous maneuver, but it paid off. The alien ship, caught off guard by the sudden disappearance of its opponents, faltered, its singularity field flickering for a brief second. That second was all Voss needed. With the Vanguard's weapons now fully powered, Captain Voss gave the order. Fire everything. The Vanguard reappeared, its massive disruptor cannons firing in unison, sending a beam of energy so concentrated that it tore through the alien ship's hull like a hot knife through butter. The massive black vessel shuddered, its shields flickering as the energy pulse hit. The first volley was followed by another and another, until the alien ship's defenses buckled. It was no longer a warship. It was debris, floating aimlessly in space. But just as the Vanguard prepared for the final blow, a second shockwave rattled the fleet. The Tsar forces, realizing they were losing, unleashed their final weapon, a massive fleet of drones, each one equipped with self-destruct mechanisms capable of turning the battlefield into a fiery inferno. Voss cursed under his breath. This wasn't over yet. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, he shouted. The next few minutes would determine whether the galaxy would see the fall of the Tsar and the rise of humanity's most deadly weapon, or if this battle would be their last. As the drone fleet surged forward, A wave of terror swept through the ranks of the Terran fleet. These drones weren't just ordinary weapons. They were designed to inflict maximum damage in the shortest amount of time. They had been specially engineered by the Tsar to bypass conventional shields and strike directly at a ship's core. With their self-destruct mechanisms primed, they were more than a threat, they were a countdown to extinction. Captain Voss's mind raced, each second feeling like an eternity as the drones began to swarm in from all directions. They were fast, relentless, and seemingly impossible to stop. The Terran fleet, already stretched thin after hours of fighting, had no real way to defend against them without risking the destruction of their own ships. For a brief moment, it seemed like the battle had slipped beyond control. The Vanguard's immense firepower had crippled the alien ship, but now the entire fleet was at risk. "We need to separate their trajectory," Voss yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos of the bridge. "All ships, execute evasive maneuvers. Deploy countermeasures now." The fleet responded with the precision that only a seasoned warship could. Smaller Terran vessels broke formation and scattered, dodging incoming drones, while the larger ships used their shields to create a barrier, trying to deflect the swarm. But the drones were too numerous, too fast, and they had one goal: destruction. As the first few drones made contact with the nearest Terran ship, the resulting explosion sent a shockwave that rocked the entire fleet. The bridge trembled under the force of the blast, and Voss's hands gripped the command chair, his knuckles white. The Vanguard was their last hope. Now its advanced weaponry was still operational, but it needed a clear shot to stop the incoming wave. "Activate the phased quantum disruptor field," Voss barked to his engineering team. "We need to phase the drones out of existence before they get any closer." The Vanguard's systems hummed with an otherworldly energy as the quantum phasing drive powered up again. The ship's immense size, its vast array of advanced weaponry, and its ability to phase in and out of reality had made it the Terran fleet's ace in the hole. Now, it would either save them or doom them all. At Voss's command, the Vanguard disappeared once more, vanishing into the folds of space. The drones, programmed to lock onto their target using simple trajectory algorithms, found themselves disoriented, losing their lock as the ship phased out of reality. The Vanguard reappeared in a different location, right in the center of the drone swarm, with its cannons fully charged. The first blast of energy released from the Vanguard's weapons was a sweeping pulse that rippled across the battlefield. The blast carved a massive hole through the drone fleet, cutting through them like paper. For every drone it struck, a series of explosions rippled outward, disrupting the others. The remaining drones, now fragmented and scattered, struggled to reform. They were losing their cohesion. A second, more focused blast from the Vanguard sent the entire remaining fleet into disarray, with hundreds of drones crashing into one another in their attempt to regroup. With the main threat neutralized, the Terran fleet regrouped, but the cost had been high. Several ships had been lost in the explosion, and the Vanguard had been forced to use much of its remaining energy to cut through the remaining drones. The Tsar, seeing their final assault fail, began retreating, their once unified fleet now a broken and disorganized mess. Voss allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but the weight of the battle still loomed large. The Vanguard had held strong, but at what cost? The alien forces were retreating for now, but the war wasn't over. Voss knew that this was only the beginning. The Vanguard had been an incredible asset, but even it had limits. The mysterious ship they had faced, the one that had absorbed their shots, was still out there, and they hadn't yet learned everything about it. The Vanguard had a greater purpose, a purpose that was tied to the future of humanity itself, but it wasn't something they could understand overnight. "Status report, Lieutenant Harlow," Voss said, trying to keep his voice steady. Harlow looked up from her console, her expression grave. "The fleet has suffered significant damage, Captain. Several ships are dead in the water, and a few others are on the verge of critical failure. The Vanguard has sustained minimal damage, but the energy expenditure is going to take some time to replenish." "We can't afford to wait," Voss replied. "Not with the Tsar regrouping. And that other ship, we need to know more about it." "We've managed to capture some data from its hull during the engagement, sir," Harlow said. "But the readings are incomplete. Whatever technology they use to protect it, it's not something we've encountered before. It's not Zarit's alien, even to them." Voss turned his gaze to the Vanguard on the view screen, now hovering serenely above the battlefield, its engines slowly powering down. The ship was still there, as formidable as ever, but something about it had changed. The Vanguard wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol. But what was its true purpose? And why had it returned now, when humanity needed it most? Chapter 4. The Forgotten Directive. The following days were a blur of recovery and debriefings. The battle had been won, but it was far from a victory. The Terran fleet had suffered heavy losses, and the Tsar forces were already retreating into the depths of space, licking their wounds and preparing for another assault. The battle for the galaxy was far from over, and Captain Voss could sense the rising tension in the command center. There was something in the air, something unspoken among the officers. The Vanguard had returned, but its role in this war, perhaps even in humanity's future, was still uncertain. Voss stood alone on the observation deck, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more troubling than the last. The Vanguard had done the impossible, but that didn't mean it had all the answers. There was still so much they didn't know about the ship, about how it had been revived and why. Its appearance on the battlefield had been a turning point, but it was clear now that its return wasn't a coincidence. The Vanguard had a purpose, and that purpose was tied to something much greater than a single battle. "Captain Voss," came a voice from behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Harlow approaching, her face as serious as ever. "Report, Lieutenant. We've uncovered something disturbing," she began. "While reviewing the captured data from the alien ship, we discovered a set of old coordinates embedded in the systems. They were encrypted, but we've cracked part of the code. It points to a system deep in uncharted space, beyond even the Tsar's territory. The coordinates are tied to an ancient Terran research station, a station that was supposedly abandoned long before the Vanguard was lost." Voss's heart skipped a beat. "A Terran station? How is that possible?" "That's what we're trying to figure out, Captain," Harlow replied, her voice tight. "The data suggests it's connected to the Vanguard's original mission, maybe even the reason it disappeared in the first place. We believe the station was conducting experiments that might have led to the creation of the Vanguard itself." Voss felt his mind racing. The Vanguard wasn't just an advanced warship, was something more. Something tied to humanity's darkest secrets, to a time when Terran science had explored the boundaries of space and reality. And if those secrets were out there, waiting to be uncovered, then this war would be nothing compared to what lay ahead. "Prepare a recon mission," Voss said firmly, his decision final. "We're heading to those coordinates. It's time to uncover the truth behind the Vanguard." And with that, Captain Voss knew that the real battle, one that would change the fate of the galaxy, was only just beginning. The Vanguard was more than a weapon. It was a key to humanity's past, present, and future, and its full purpose had yet to be revealed. As they set their course for the unknown, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that everything they thought they knew about the Vanguard was about to be rewritten. The journey to the uncharted system was long, and the quiet hum of the Vanguard as it drifted through the void seemed almost like a living thing, an ancient beast awakened from a slumber that spanned centuries. Captain Voss spent most of the journey on the bridge, staring at the star maps, his thoughts heavy with the implications of their mission. The coordinates they had uncovered were leading them to a place beyond even the Tsar's reach, a place hidden so deeply in the galaxy that only those with the most advanced navigational skills had a chance of finding it. No one had known about the Terran research station for centuries. No one had dared to ask what might lie there. Until now, Voss had heard stories about the early days of the Terran Dominion, the grand dreams of interstellar exploration, the pursuit of knowledge, the thirst for power. What if this research station, abandoned long ago, had something to do with the Vanguard? What if it had been the birthplace of the ship, or worse, the catalyst that had created a weapon beyond anything humanity had ever intended? His mind could not stop racing with questions. He had to know. The galaxy needed to know. Lieutenant Harlow had been just as relentless, digging deeper into the encrypted data they had retrieved. Despite the technology they had at their disposal, they could only decipher fragments of the old transmission, but each piece revealed more and more. They had discovered traces of an experimental project linked directly to quantum entanglement, spatial anomalies, and the manipulation of time itself. If the Vanguard had been involved in such a project, then its return was no accident. It had been part of something far more intricate, far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. As they neared the system, the atmosphere aboard the ship shifted. The crew knew that they were approaching something historic, something that could change the course of the war. Everyone was on edge, from the engineers to the fighters. It wasn't just the Tsar anymore. The Vanguard's origins were calling to them, beckoning them to uncover the truth. There was no turning back now. The system they entered was a ghostly quiet. The stars around them seemed dimmer, as if the very light had been drained by the mysterious forces that lay hidden within. The first sign of anything unusual came when their sensors picked up the faintest anomaly, a small object, seemingly floating in the dead center of a massive gravitational void. The object was unlike anything they had encountered, a structure that barely registered on the scans, almost as if it was being cloaked by the very space around it. "That's it," Harlow said softly, her fingers trembling over her console. "That's the station." The Vanguard came to a stop as the Terran fleet fell into a cautious orbit around the object. The research station, or what was left of it, was not what Voss had expected. It wasn't a sprawling complex, as he had envisioned, but a massive, decaying structure that looked more like a fragment of an old warship, abandoned and lost to time. It was encrusted in dark materials, as if the very metal had been melted and reformed by some cosmic event. The structure had been battered, torn apart by forces that even the most advanced Terran weapons could not have caused. "Prepare to board," Voss commanded, his voice steady despite the chill that had settled in his bones. "Bring the Vanguard down to the docking port. We need to secure this station, understand its purpose." As the crew descended toward the research station, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The ship's massive form hovered near the ruined docking bay, its size a stark contrast to the crumbling structure. They had no idea what they would find inside, but there was no turning back. This was the only place where answers lay, answers that might explain everything from the Vanguard's return to the Tsar's relentless pursuit. Captain Voss and his team suited up and prepared to board. The silence of the station, once bustling with life, was now oppressive. The metallic clang of boots on steel echoed through the empty corridors, and the faint hum of ancient machinery hinted at some semblance of life, or at least, a residual energy. When they finally reached the core of the station, the truth they uncovered was far beyond what they had expected. It wasn't just a research facility. It was a repository of secrets of Terran experiments with dark and forbidden technologies. The Vanguard was not merely a ship. It had been the result of a failed experiment with a quantum singularity device, an attempt to create a new type of propulsion system that could bend time and space itself. The ship's disappearance had been no accident. It had been a part of a grander, more dangerous experiment. The Vanguard had been sent to the edge of the known galaxy, to a place beyond all reach, to keep the terrible secret hidden. And the message from the past transmitted by the station's AI, now long dead, was chilling in its clarity. The Vanguard was never meant to return. The power within it cannot be contained. If it is unleashed, it will bring about the end of all things. The experiment had failed, and the crew of the Vanguard had been lost. The ship itself had been caught in a temporal loop, trapped between the folds of space and time. It had been an unintentional consequence of the quantum singularity drive, a drive that could have reshaped reality itself. The Vanguard had returned not because it had been revived, but because it had always been there, caught in a tear in the fabric of existence. It had been a weapon, a tool of war, and an instrument of destruction, all bound by the very forces of the universe it had once sought to control. Voss looked at the data, the truth settling in. The Vanguard was more than just a ship, it was a key. A key to a terrible power, one that was already beginning to take shape in the form of the Tsar's new alien allies. But worse, it was clear that the Tsar, too, had been searching for the same answers. The power to control space-time, to alter the course of history, had been a double-edged sword. Now, it was only a matter of time before others would seek it out, and the galaxy could descend into chaos. The Vanguard was the last of its kind, Harlow said quietly, her voice filled with disbelief. It was never supposed to come back. Voss looked at the ruin of the station, at the glowing data streams flickering in front of him. The true purpose of the Vanguard had been revealed, and yet, the implications were almost too great to comprehend. It had never been about just winning a war. It had been about power, about creating something so immense, so far-reaching, that it could change the very fabric of the universe. He turned away from the station's core, his expression grim. "We have to stop them. We can't let this power fall into the wrong hands." With the truth of the Vanguard now fully known, Captain Voss and his team left the abandoned station, their mission complete. but their work far from over. The battle for the galaxy had taken a new direction. The Vanguard was not just a weapon, it was a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It was waiting, quietly, in the shadows, ready to rise again. And now, humanity had to decide. Would they control it, or would it control them? The answer would come, not in the war that was to come, but in the choices made at this moment. Would they unleash the power of the Vanguard, or would they destroy it forever, before it could claim its place as the galaxy's ultimate force? And with that, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance, as Captain Voss set his course toward an uncertain horizon, prepared to face whatever came next.